Welcome. The sun has been getting a lot more active of late, so I've decided to change my regular monthly solar reports to weekly reports so I can get more detail in and let you know what's going on more quickly. So here goes. I'm going to cover 6 areas. First, sunspots, coronal holes, etc. Then flares, coronal mass ejections, geomagnetic storms, forecasts of the activity that we expect over the coming weeks and months, and then also an update on the solar cycle. First, let's take a look at the situation of sunspots over this week from the 1st to the 7th of June. Sunspot number was averaging 34 throughout this 1 week period, ranging from 20 to 50. We had 0 spotless days in that time. It has been 32 days since our last spotless day, which is the second longest run during solar cycle 25. We had 4 regions numbered by NOAA: 27, 28, 29, and 30. Region 28 died on the disk on the 1st of June, and as it's the region that has basically disappeared, it's unlikely it will ever return. 27, 29, and 30 are still active on the disk, although 27 and 30 are about to go over the west limb of the sun, and we won't see them for at least 2 weeks. Well, I don't just keep track of the numbered regions, I keep track of any region that produces a sunspot, no matter how small or for how short a time. We've had 9 new sunspot regions appeared on that basis. 3 were in the northern hemisphere and 6 were in the southern hemisphere. And you can see the month of June is already beginning to fill in quite nicely with those 9 events. You can see there's been a rapid increase in activity since this time last year. And there's also was a major burst of activity back in November and December of 2020. And we found in previous studies of the solar cycle that these bursts typically occur every 6 to 9 months. So we'll be due for another one in the none too distant future. I'm now going to show you some movies, and as a guide I'll show you where these regions are. We have 28, 27 currently near the northwest limb, so you'll see that in the northwest quadrant over this week. 28, 29 developed in the southeast of the sun early in this period and is slowly developed as it's crossed the disk. In the last few days, 28, 30 has appeared in the southwest quadrant of the sun near the limb, and unfortunately will soon disappear, although it too seems to be growing quite rapidly. Sunspot movie using the Solar Dynamics Observatory HMI white light channel. In this movie, 1 second will equal 12 hours. Solar rotation will be from east to west. The next movie I'm going to show you is a movie of the magnetic field of the sun, so-called magnetogram movies. That is also from the Solar Dynamics HMI instrument. Otherwise, everything else is similar to the sunspot movie. Next, we'll take a look at the corona. This is the low temperature corona, and so we'll use the SDO AIA instrument at 171 angstroms. This is at a temperature about 650,000 degrees Kelvin, so it's quite hot. But this is what's called the quiet. I think this is somewhat amusing because when you see the sun, it generally is never very quiet. What it does show is magnetic loop structures and interconnections and the dynamics of those, so that's worth paying attention. Next, we'll take a look at coronal holes. Coronal holes are these dark areas on the sun To see those, we use the 193 angstrom channel of AIA. These dark areas are low density and low temperature. That means that they produce less emission because there's less collision between the ions concerned. These areas here are polar coronal holes. They're almost always there except for at solar maximum when they just about disappear. There are lower latitude coronal holes, and there's the example shown here. And those are the ones that often can affect the Earth with high-speed wind streams. These are areas of open magnetic field, and that's why they're the source of these high-speed streams, because it allows the solar plasma to flow out uninhibited by magnetic fields. It was a relatively quiet week for flares. We had one C flare at the beginning of the period on June 1st. Here's a picture of it. It was from region 2827. Otherwise, we had a large number of small B flares. And when I show you the flare movie, you'll see a lot of the regions, not just one of them, producing these little flashes. And that's all of these B flares that you're looking at. Last but not least, we're going to look at coronal mass ejections. To that, we go to a different spacecraft, the SOHO spacecraft, and use the LASCO coronagraph fields of view, the C2 and the C3. We detect 4 CMEs according to the Cactus catalog. Now, the way to read these images is the red area in the middle of the field of view is the high resolution C2 field of view, and the blue area is the lower resolution but much larger C3 field of view. The dark diagonal line you see coming in from about 7 o'clock is the support bracket. Sometimes during the year they flip SOHO up the other way, and the bracket will be out at about 1 o'clock, but at the moment it's down there. The bright areas on here are stars. They will move from left to right. Anything that moves from right to left is a planet. The solar wind was fairly quiet for this period, except for on the last day, the 7th of June. BZ was pretty quiet. You can see just at the end there, it starts to move up and down. BZ is the red line at the top here. The density of the solar wind plasma has changed, but relatively minorly, between 7 and 40 over this time period. That's particles per cubic centimeter. The speed has been pretty much constant at about 300 to 400 kilometers per second. But in this last day, it's shot out to about 500 kilometers per second. And the temperature of the plasma that's been passing the Earth has been quite variable, going from anything from 10,000 degrees Kelvin to over 1,000,000 degrees Kelvin. Let's talk about geomagnetic activity. There have been no major geomagnetic storms during this period. In fact, the sun was relatively quiet throughout the time. However, just in the very last sample on the 7th of June, we had a KP index jump to 4, which is considered to be unsettled. That was probably the result of that higher speed magnetic wind and the variations in BZ. Here are the models that are forecast for the auroral oval. Nothing particularly exciting going on either in the northern or the southern hemisphere. Let's take a trip down memory lane here. Here are 3 magnetic images of the sun taken exactly 1 year apart. On the left we have 2019, which would have still been in the decay phase of solar cycle 24. And you can see that we have very little strong magnetic field activity here. And what there is just spread out plage regions near the center of the disk and near the equator. A year later, we were beginning to see the first signs of sunspot regions coming up. We have a weak region up in the northern hemisphere there, but a much stronger one coming in the southeast quadrant of the sun. Now today, we have a lot more activity on the sun. This is a graph of the sunspot number over the last 13 years. Yellow is the daily sunspot number. You can see that's quite variable. The blue is the monthly average sunspot number, and the red is the smooth sunspot number averaged over a period of 13 months. Solar cycle 24 peaked in April of 2014, as you can see there, and we went to solar minimum in December of 2019. Since then, solar cycle 25 has started to take off. There are two possible models that the cycle can follow. There's the dashed line or the dot and dash line shown in the bottom right. Now, but how does this compare with the uptake of solar cycle 24? I've moved those same lines over to the left here. As you can see, even the more modest cycle model is outperforming solar cycle 25 so far by a factor of nearly 2, and the more aggressive model is outperforming it by a factor of 3. So this looks like that we're going to have a much larger cycle than solar cycle 24. And you'll remember my prediction from some of my previous videos was 165 plus or minus 30. That would be in the plausible range, but there are people that have predictions now that are much higher, and I'm beginning to think that they may be right. The forecast for geospace is not very exciting. We have low speed and low density solar wind passing the Earth and no major events. Now, of course, a CME could change that very, very quickly, and I'll keep you informed on my Twitter channel if you want to find out what's going on there before the next report next week. The Stereo A spacecraft is about 45 degrees behind the Earth, so you can see a little bit over the east limb of the sun and see what's coming. Unfortunately, the data generally takes 2 or 3 days to come in, so there is a lag there that is making use of this a little bit less than useful. But you can see a correspondence, for example, between that region, these two regions, and again here, and again here. Now, you can see from the stereo image that there's a new region coming over the southeast limb. Now, that's not the return of a previous sunspot region, because I checked. This is a brand new region that developed on the backside of the sun. So it might be very interesting when it comes over the limb in the next few days. NASA and NOAA formed a solar cycle 25 prediction panel, and this is the prediction that they came up with here in blue. The dotted lines are the uncertainty on that prediction. Now, how does that compare with the data? I've put the data so far in the bottom left-hand corner, and you see that again the solar cycle 25 seems to be rising somewhat quicker than their model predicted. So what conclusions can we draw from all of this? It's been a relatively quiet week with no major flares or geomagnetic storms. Sunspots are still emerging regularly, and it's been over a month since we had a spotless day. The outlook for the coming week, at least at the moment, is relatively quiet. Now, of course, a new region can emerge at any moment and change all of that and produce a lot of flares, so we have to keep an eye out for those. We're going to lose active regions 2827 and 2830 over the limb in the next day or two, and there are no major spot regions due back anytime during this period. It seems that solar cycle 25 is still developing and quite rapidly, and so talk of a grand solar minimum or a coming ice age is just nonsense, as I've been maintaining for some time. So until next time, stay safe and goodbye.